The story of Irish whiskey is a roller coaster of ups and downs and twists and turns. It's been a thrilling ride, which at one point was heading for disaster. So sit back and relax as we uncover why the Irish whiskey industry almost completely died out and how it fought back to not only survive, but to challenge preconceptions and offer a bit more than you might expect. As recently as 1987, Ireland had only two working distilleries, namely Bushmills in County Antrim and Middleton in County Cork. Both of these facilities were in the ownership of Irish distillers, which made triple distilled single malt at Bushmills and triple distilled pure pot still and grain spirit at Middleton, giving them a monopoly on Irish whiskey production. It's hard to grasp just how brutal the decline really was. After all, Irish whiskey once ruled the world. The industry had suffered a catastrophic collapse since it dominated the global whiskey market in the late 19th century. It was one of the most highly regarded drinks in the world, and it's said that even in Scotland, Irish whiskey outsold Scotch. Irish whiskey was known as pure pot still whiskey, using a mixed mash bill or recipe that included raw unmalted barley with the malt. That helped to create a viscous, spicy, full-bodied dram, a world away from what we might think of nowadays as light, triple distilled Irish whiskey. There were a number of different factors that led to the industry's decline, but one of the main ones came from an Irishman himself. Aeneas Coffey was instrumental in the development of the coffee still, which allowed for continuous distillation. The still could produce grain spirit on a much greater scale than pot stills and to higher strengths, and that made it ideal for the purposes of blending. The main Irish distillers weren't the least bit enthusiastic about their countryman's invention. They dismissed its product as vastly inferior to their traditional pure pot still whiskey. And four big Dublin distillers even published a book called Truths About Whiskey. In it, they laid out their case that whiskey that included grain spirit from a coffee still didn't qualify as real whiskey at all and was nothing more than a fraud on customers. The art of blending, however, and the use of grain whiskey produced from continuous stills was thoroughly embraced in Scotland, which went on to market the smoother, more palatable, blended Scotch style of whiskey to the British Empire and around the world. So Scotch never looked back, and Irish whiskey continued to suffer setback after setback. As Scotch boomed, over 3/4 of Ireland's distilleries closed down, and Irish pure pot still whiskey pretty much vanished altogether. By 1933, the boss of the massive Scottish company, Distillers Company Limited, William Ross, could safely declare that Ireland is an irrelevance. And it remained something of an irrelevance for the next half-century or so, surviving only with the marketing of triple distilled, soft, smooth, unpeated spirit. It was only in 1987 that a new player finally came on the Irish whiskey scene. That's when John Teeling set up Cooley Distillery, the first new Irish whiskey distillery in a century. Cooley adopted Scotch-style double distillation using malted barley, an innovation that has subsequently been adopted by many of the more recent start-up Irish distilleries. By the end of the 1990s, Irish whiskey was back on an upward trajectory, with more distillers emerging who were harking back to the days of the pure pot still form of production. And now, Irish whiskey is challenging many people's preconceptions that it's all smooth and triple distilled. In a large part, it's returning to its true heritage and producing a more robust and flavourful double distilled pure pot still style of whiskey. There are now more than 30 distilleries across Ireland, many of whom are championing alternative grains, creative mash bill ratios, various forms of peating levels, and double distillation. Suddenly, Ireland's whiskey scene is as dynamic as anywhere in the world, and it seems to be operating with a freedom and energy that could only come from having a new lease of life when it seemed so close to extinction. Here's one for St. Patrick's Day wherever you are. Cheers.